we're going to outline 10 things that can be done to and help protect your business. All right, so why is cybersecurity important to your company or organization? Well, for basic business reasons, as the industry and government has evolved, there are now fines that can be imposed by the government on you as a business in the event you lose client or patient information. And this is particularly true for companies that are in healthcare, but the HIPAA regulations really are much more far-reaching than you think of your doctor's office. Anybody who deals with any information that looks like medical information is covered by HIPAA rules. Another is to avoid contractual penalties. Those penalties are probably the clearest for those companies that take credit cards with PCI. Another area that you want to avoid as a company is to avoid employee lost time. Okay, if there's a cyber event, often your employees are left sitting at their desk with nothing to do while the viruses are remediated. And the last thing you want to avoid is a damage to the reputation of your business. All right, I'm going to start with HIPAA because HIPAA really began the definition of what constitutes privacy and this whole other concept of what constitutes a breach. HIPAA was really started in 1996 as a series of regulations to provide consumers and patients with protection of their health information. It evolved into a large body of regulations. It's managed through the federal government, through the Health and Human Services Department, and specifically the Office of Civil Rights of HHS is the sort of the enforcement arm of HIPAA privacy rules. Fines are applied if protected health information or PHI is breached, and I'll talk more about what constitutes a breach later in the presentation. It's really important to understand how that term is defined and what it applies to. The amount of the penalty is determined by HHS based on the size of the breach and also based on how conforming an entity is to the security guidelines that the government has released. So the security guidelines, the HIPAA guidelines for security are fairly well spelled out in regulations. The regulations are not set out to be all determining. In other words, here's everything you're supposed to do, and we realize that some of these things have expenses to them, so you as a business owner can make decisions to have less security because of the onerous expense of actually doing it. And I'll talk a little bit about that as I talk about security risk assessments. So security risk assessments are part of the annual meaningful use attestation. That's really very healthcare specific, but the thing to understand here as a business owner is that the government regulations require healthcare firms to go through an annual risk assessment. And this is very similar to what's also required for the payment card industry for credit card clearing. The other thing that's of note here is if you as a patient think that your patient data has been compromised and is somewhere out on the internet now, and you want to report a breach, there's the link to click on that will take you to a form to fill out to report the breach to the Office of Civil Rights, and at that point they'll open a case up and they'll pursue the vendor. And again, the fines that get generated by an investigation by HHS are two-factor. One is how big was the breach, how many patients were involved, and secondly, how good were the defenses when they look at that risk assessment? What decisions did the company make? What defenses did they have in place? Were they trying to do industry best practices? The more compliant you are, the less the fine is. Okay. The second area I'm going to talk about is contractual penalties. The payment card industry, or PCI, any entity that accepts credit cards is covered by these PCI industry standards for security and payment card processing. And there are a variety of tiers in PCI. starting at the lowest tier, which is less than 20,000 credit card transactions a year, and then it escalates up. You think of large companies like Walmart, where they process millions or maybe even billions of transactions a year. They have a whole different set of requirements for how they have to monitor and do things. In October 1st, 2015 of this year, the payment card industry tightened their rules up, and they really shifted the onus of losses from the banks more to the merchants. They added some teeth to the existing regulations and guidelines for what the merchants have to do to protect credit card information if they own it. And if that credit card information gets breached or stolen and used, then the merchants are much more likely to have to shoulder the burden of those expenses than they were before October 1st. So the whole concept of PCI compliance and protecting that credit card information is much more critical today than it was 6 months ago. Companies and practices are now liable for any charges made with credit card information that is stolen. Okay, that's a key change in the regulations, where more of that liability is shifted over to the merchants from the banks. And just to give you an example, and this was even before these new rules went into effect, TJ Maxx is probably one of the most well-known hacks in the industry, and they've had to pay over $100 million to the banks for the breach. So that's reimbursing the banks for their expenses for reissuing credit cards, for merchandise that was purchased with credit card information that was stolen. That's just one example of how those fees and expenses can really pile up. How do you know if you've been breached? It's a really good question. 95% of the firms that are breached find out from third parties. So the answer to the question is, more often than not, if you've been breached, you're not ever going to find out until you get a call from merchant services or you get a call from a patient. Then you'll find out that you've been breached. That's just industry average statistics. It's not, and it goes to the heart of some of the other things I'll talk about, of just what our threats are from cybercrime today. In HIPAA, it's going to be the Office of Civil Rights. They're going to open a case and contact you. If it's PCI, the firm that processes your credit card charges contacts you. So the merchant clearing firms have very sophisticated software that look for patterns in credit card usage, and will connect the dots and trace them back to you. And again, companies generally don't have any idea that they've been breached when they're breached by these outside third parties. That was true with Sony as early as last year, where they had a significant breach going on for many months, and it was an outside firm that really brought it to their attention. What constitutes a breach? Okay, this is really an important definition, and this goes to the heart of a lot of what we need to consider and talk about. The HHS website, and again, this goes back to the HIPAA rules where they really started to define some of these terms. A breach is generally an impermissible use or disclosure under the privacy rule that compromises the security or privacy of protected health information. A breach applies to any PHI. So in the healthcare space, your name, your address, your social security, your medical condition, any of your medical test results, all of that constitutes protected health information that if it leaked out, that would become a breach. And that breach is anywhere from 1 patient to 1 million patients. The breach rule really doesn't care whether it's 1 or 1 million. What it does do is it applies a threshold so that if a breach includes 500 or more patients, then the patients have to be notified and there has to be public disclosure. So that's the only threshold that they have in the HIPAA breach rules for 5. But the concept of a breach, as they've defined it, is the same for PCI And it's the same for other federal regulations they're looking at now. So that HIPAA body of security information is really becoming the basis for not just healthcare, but it was also adopted by PCI, and it's going to be adopted for more sweeping federal rules that I think will come out over the next few years that will cover PII, which is protected individual information. So they're going to broaden that term and apply it to all information that's stored for even companies like Google and Microsoft. A fair question to ask is, have you been breached? When a computer gets today's generation of viruses or malware, is it a breach? Yes or no? Now, I'm going to lead you through a series of today's threats and talk about how the threats work. I'm going to also talk about cybercrime and the whole business enterprise that's sprung up around cybercrime. And you may want to become a cyber criminal after I talk about some of this and how relatively easy it is to make money and avoid prosecution. But from a business owner's perspective, when you see some of these viruses and malwares come in, this is something that you need to carry around in the back of your mind. And remember, when I defined breach earlier, it's anywhere from 1 to 1 million records of that patient type information, or you can think of it as client information, that gets compromised and taken. Before I start in on this, though, I'm going to talk specifically about hackers and cybercrime, but always as a business owner, you have to remember that the #1 area of data loss is from your employees, not from outside hackers or external forces. It's your employees inadvertently deleting data, your employees wantonly taking data. That's the #1 area of loss in a business for PHI and other sensitive information. Hackers, though, have become a specifically new and different type of threat over the last few years. What motivates hackers? Certainly money motivates them now. Now, back in the early days of hacking, it really was more of a fun and sport. You know, they would figure out how to hack into IBM or whatever the company was, and they would go high fives after drinking lots of Coke and eating lots of pizza. That's really changed, and their focus now is on how do you make money with these software tools. And of course, the other area that we don't see quite as much down in our space is state-sponsored spying, where countries like China or North Korea or Russia have an interest in perhaps some of your intellectual property or operations that you run, and will target your firm and work to gather your trade secrets and other information. How do cyber criminals make money? Okay, and this is really important and goes to kind of the core businesses of cybercrime. The first is resource theft. The next is user data. And the third way, which is really a new way, is pay for service. So resource theft. Resources, you think of your computer as a resource. You have disk space, you have CPU that can process stuff, you have internet usage, you have a whole bunch of resources on your computer. So what the hackers have done is they've developed very sophisticated software that allows them to take over your computer and use those resources for their own purposes. Now, in the early days of this resource utilization, they used to sort of ignore the time of day, and you'd get pop-ups and you'd notice your computer running slowly. And what they've done is gotten much more sophisticated, and they're able to manage your computer or any computer that they have control over by watching the usage pattern of that computer, looking at the time zone where the computer is located to determine, gee, you know, it's midnight right now, this computer's on, I can use it very heavily because nobody else is going to be on it. So they have all of those types of algorithms in place to make full utilization of the resources they have at their disposal. They use those things for email relays. You know, how do you distribute 1 million emails for spam, you do it 1,000 at a time from 1,000 different endpoints. That's how you do it. And that's how it's done today with cyber criminals. They break those big email lists down into smaller batches and they send them out to their robot computers that are scattered all around the world. Denial of service attacks. You hear about these frequently where large websites get attacked, like Bank of America or banking websites recently. And those denial of service attacks are mounted by these networks of robot computers that are owned by cyber criminals where they'll target a specific website. Now, how they make money with that, of course, email relays. You pay X amount of cents per email that goes out to the company that can do the email relay for you. So your Viagra ad gets distributed to the 10 million people you want to get it distributed to. In terms of denial of service attacks, the denial of service attack may target a specific company. The criminals will reach out to that company and say, hey, if you want your website back, you're going to have to pay us money. The third way is file storage. So it's not unusual once your computer gets compromised that it becomes a location for either file, program, or in many cases, pornography storage for cyber criminals. And they would use your computer as a node on their network for storing data. DNS, domain name services, another way they could use your computer is as a rogue DNS server. So if they do a DNS hijacking of computers on people's networks, they can redirect the DNS request to your computer, and your computer can then send the request instead of to Google to the bad guy's website, and or more likely a banking website where they've cloned the website for you to enter in your credentials. Once they have those credentials, they can use them to actually clean your bank account out. And the last area is command and control, where your computer can become a node on their network that actually helps them control other computers on their network. So they distribute their command and control over multiple computers. So if the police come in and they crack down on one location, there are probably a dozen other locations that immediately fail over and pick up command control of these networks. These are very sophisticated, well-planned, and well-run networks. The second area of money where criminals make money is user data. And this is the one that most people worry about, where the viruses and malware will work to discover your identity. And there are a number of different ways that the viruses and malware today do that. The first is they'll do a file discovery on your computer. They'll go out and look around for files that say password or accounts or whatever, and try and gather up information from the files. They'll do keystroke logging. So as you're typing in your credentials into the banking website, it will actually record the keystrokes. Screenshots. This is another area where the cyber criminals can simply take pictures of the screens that you're on and then transfer those screenshots through their command and control center to people who can evaluate them. File transfers. If they find files that look interesting, they can actually transfer them into their command and control center and evaluate the file transfers. And computer remote control, they can actually take over your computer and just run it. So if they wanted to pretend to be you at your computer to transfer your bank account, they've gathered your login and password through keystroke logging. They remote to your computer because it's got the secret ID that the bank gave you. They remote to it, they log in as you, and they transfer all the money to one of their offshore accounts. Happens all too frequently. The last area that I'm going to talk about is the most interesting one, that's really only about a year old. It's pay for service. Some of you may have heard about the CryptoLocker virus. The CryptoLocker virus is a result, again, of a virus or malware that gets introduced to your computer. What CryptoLocker does is it looks out at all of the data that's on your computer and also connected to your computer through network connections. So if you connect to a company drive on a file server, the CryptoLocker software will see that, and what it does is it encrypts all of the files, all of the data files that it can find. Once those files are encrypted, you can no longer open them or work with them until they are decrypted. Now, we've gone through about a half a dozen of these situations with clients. The ones that we have are our backup protection suite. We've simply rolled them back to an earlier point in time before the encryption occurred. We clean off the evil software and we roll their data back to a point just before this happened, so that there's no ransom involved. For other clients, we've actually had to pay ransom and get the decryption keys, hold our breath, run the decryption, and knock on wood, so far, all of that decryption has worked so far. So what you see here, and it's interesting with what's going on with Apple at this point. In my mind, the whole government fight with Apple over decryption is too little too late. What you see here on the screen is a screen from what's called the Tor, T-O-R browser. The Tor browser was developed by criminals for a criminal encrypted network. So they have their own communications channel that runs right on the internet in full view, but all the communications that go over it are encrypted with encryption keys that are in the control of cyber criminals. So in order to find out about what your ransom is, let's say you are infected with the CryptoLocker virus and all your files are encrypted and you don't have any backups. You don't have any choice to get your data back except to call the cyber criminals up. We recently heard that one of these ransoms was $17,000. I'll show you as I walk through this what we observed and copied for one of our clients. One of the things that's really made this whole business possible is the introduction of Bitcoins. For those of you who don't know about Bitcoins, Bitcoins is a new type of currency that was introduced in Japan. And what it does is it creates a chain of custody and ledgers for people that own Bitcoins. And it also provides a translation or an exchange rate from Bitcoins to all major currencies. The advantage of Bitcoins for cyber criminals is Bitcoins are not traceable. Because of how the Bitcoin system works, the transfer of funds through Bitcoins cannot be traced to an individual. That makes it the ideal currency for criminals to transfer funds from victims to themselves. It's an international currency. It can be converted into euros, dollars, all major currencies. Once you have the Bitcoin there, and there are actually publicly traded companies that deal in Bitcoin. So not only is it a shady currency, it's also a large recognized market in international finance. The ransom requests are made in US dollars or Bitcoins. This is an example of a ransom request, and you can see up here at the top, you did not pay in time for decryption. That's why the decryption increases 2 times. At the moment, the cost of decrypting your files is $1,000 US dollars or euros. Now, there was a conversion rate of euros to Bitcoin, so the first thing you have to do in order to pay the ransom is you have to get Bitcoins. Well, most people don't even know what a Bitcoin is, let alone know how to get a Bitcoin. So in order for us to be able to support our clients, we actually set up a Bitcoin account with a large firm, and we have that linked to a separate bank account that we maintain that basically has no money in it except when we need to pay Bitcoin ransoms. We transfer money into our checking account for this. It gets linked into the Bitcoin account. We transfer funds in, we get Bitcoins, and we pay the ransom. So what you can see here is an actual screenshot from the ransom request that you get after your files are encrypted. So in a CryptoLocker virus, within the folder where your files are encrypted, you're going to see a file that says encrypt help or decrypt help or something like that. And those files will provide you instructions to install the Tor browser, which is the criminal's browser, and the link, once you open the Tor browser up, to get to this screen so that you can find out what your ransom's going to be. All right, so now we know that the ransom is $1,000. I have to go get my Bitcoins and pay it. So at this point, I've paid my Bitcoins, and on behalf of this client, I'm having problems. They're not sending me the decryption key, and it doesn't look like they've acknowledged the fact that I've paid them. So there was actually a link for technical support, and as you can see here in the dialogue, this is the actual dialogue I had with the criminals tech support. So think about this. Somewhere in the world, there are a bunch of people sitting in a room watching a console for all these people that are infected, providing tech support for resolving issues for payments and decryption of software. So as we go through this, my first question is, we've input the payment information and it comes up wrong. We think it's right and have verified the information provided. Please check this on your website. I didn't hear back from them. I was getting worried because our expiration time was getting close. They said, our interaction is marked valid, but we've not been given the software and decryption key. Please provide the software and key. And then I said, any word on this issue? And then I get an answer back, checking on it. Then it says, refresh the main page. So they made some fix on their back end, and now I was able to get the software. We did download the decryption software, but there was no decryption key included in the zip file. Can you provide the decryption key? Again, refresh the main page. They went in, saw the problem, they fixed it, they gave me the right key, and off I went. I was getting better support from the cyber criminals in this case that I often get from Microsoft. All right? Think about that. You've got a full business operation here. They've got their own currency. They've got their own business model. They've got their own tech support. All right? This is not a small problem. This is a big problem, and it's big money. Why haven't the authorities stopped it? Most of these exploits are initiated overseas in safe havens. All right, so you have areas in Eastern Europe, you have areas in Africa where criminals can set up bases of operations connected to the internet that they are completely insulated from the authorities. Local governments are paid off to protect the criminals. The cybercrime enterprise is often a large employer in an economically depressed area. So think of it as the only industry in this town. They bring in all the money, they pay all the people. And they use cloaking technologies to hide their identities and locations. And they have international footprints that mask their locations and identities. So it's really, really difficult to find. So there are actually websites that you can go to on the internet that give you, it's almost like a franchise. For X amount of dollars, you can get the kit to get started doing some of these things. Now, if you did that, I would suggest you go offshore of the United States, because if you're in the United States, you'd have some authorities to deal with. But even here in the United States, if you're partaking in one of these criminal enterprises, it's very difficult for the different levels of government to determine who is actually the jurisdiction for chasing these people around. Because we've had many situations where we've had these occurrences, and I've reached out to local authorities, state authorities, and federal authorities for a jurisdiction just to report the crime to, and they all throw their hands up. It's a real problem. So now I've described what the cyber criminals are doing and how they're doing it. And I ask you the question again. Does getting today's generation of viruses or malware constitute a breach, yes or no? I'm not going to answer that question for you. I want you to think of that as a business owner. Today we treat viruses and malware as a nuisance that gets removed. But did it constitute a breach? And all that takes is a change in definition from the government to say, if you got a virus or malware, it was a breach, report it, and then it becomes a breach. 10 tips for better security. the top of my list is employee education. By far, that's the most important thing. Employees need to understand what types of activities are appropriate and correct on the internet. There are different kinds of websites that they shouldn't go to. Some of that can be reinforced with firewall rules that keep people from going to places they shouldn't. But again, employee information is critical. Use the latest version of your antivirus software. Make sure that's kept current. Keep your virus definitions current. If you see the little star after each line, that means that these are things that are included in the security risk assessment from HIPAA. These are things that are cited that have to be current HIPAA regulations. Another thing that we've introduced is running a second opinion malware scanner. So we actually, for all of our managed service clients, do 2 different scans with 2 different software packages, and that complementary cleaning really does a nice job with getting rid of all of the bad stuff on the machines. Keep Windows current with patches. That's really critical because the bad guys are taking advantages of holes in the operating system to get their software planted. Use a real firewall with unified threat management. The firewall that Verizon or Comcast give you doesn't really have all the firewall information or all the firewall tools in it that they need to protect your network. So you need to get something like a Sonic wall that has unified threat management that actually takes a look at the packets going in and out and makes a determination on whether or not they might be bad packets. Use filtered DNS. Different DNS services like OpenDNS and Google actually look at the DNS request, and if it looks like it's going to some invalid DNS server, it will block the traffic. So those are very helpful in helping to keep you from getting infected. Always use strong passwords, 8 characters, uppercase, lowercase characters. Use those strong passwords. There should be some kind of password cycling that you follow to. Industry best practice is 90 days, 60 days, or even a year. If you change your passwords once in a while, it's a good practice. Use a third-party email spam filtering service. Once that evil email hits your inbox, you're at risk. Whether you know you're not trying to click on it, but if you do by accident, it's the same as clicking on it as on purpose. You're going to get infected. So what you really need to do is catch that stuff before it ever gets to your inbox, and cloud-based spam filters are definitely the way to go. And the other thing that's very useful to get is network health reports that show exactly the status of your antivirus software and your patching, your key lines of defense on the client machines on some kind of regular basis, at least monthly, to see how your network's doing. So with that, I'm going to take everybody off mute. If you have any questions for me, I've given you kind of a quick rundown. I hope I scared you with some of today's threats. They're very real. They make money. These are big enterprises, and almost weekly we hear, if not locally, nationally, of different exploits that have happened. So, anybody have any questions for me? I think I've taken everybody off mute. Courtney, are you off mute?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
All right. If nobody has any questions, I thank you all for joining the webinar today. We're going to have a webinar each quarter, and keep an eye out for what those topics will be. I'm thinking of doing the next one on internet speed and how to improve it and how to measure it, and then probably with the cloud on how to move your business more to the cloud.
Marshall, this is Mary Jean.
Yep.
Hi, I do have one question. I mean, this may seem obvious, but I'm assuming if we get a ransomware notice, the first call should be to you.
That's correct.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
Mean, you have Bitcoin, I don't have Bitcoin. And the question of whether we can dial back to an earlier version, I guess, is really the most salient and likely possibility. But that's number one, right?
Correct. correct. As soon as you realize you have it, you call us up. Absolutely.
Yep.
And then we immediately go into an assessment mode of how bad is it, and where are the backups and where are our restore points.
Okay. And so essentially you're working on this as a cost of doing business approach rather than a panic we're about to be eliminated, all of our files are about. I mean, that's just really not, that's not a necessary or wise approach. I know people are really terrified by this, and it is pretty freaky.
Well, what this really does
sounds more
is,
like a business strategy.
From a business strategy standpoint, it just sort of accentuates the importance of having good backups.
Right.
When we've gotten into situations where we've had clients who don't use our backup solution and didn't have good backups, their bill for our time to do the recovery has run into many thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Because although so far at least, the decryption tools that the criminals have given us have worked, it's a very manual process with their tools to go in and decrypt things. So if you think of all of your company data encrypted, hundreds of folders, thousands or hundreds of thousands of files, and it's a manual, slow decryption process, and we're billing by the hour, it gets expensive.
That's crazy.
It's crazy, and it's not
expensive.
It's not business that we like to get, but
right.
we'll get it fixed. But it's just so
you're saying that the decryption is not like, okay, you've got all the files encrypted, and now we turn the key and they all get unencrypted. That's not how it works.
You can think of it simply like that, but it's not quite so easy when you look at your data on the server and what it actually encrypts.
Okay.
The other thing that's really risky, because what happens is typically the way that files are structured, you have both data and programs in the same space.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't really want to find out what happens with one of these tools doing decryption on your QuickBooks program.
Right. Oh, God.
Right. So in those situations, you wind up drilling in and just decrypting specific files.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a certain amount of care that has to be taken when you're using their tools, and their tools. Each generation of their tools are different. So we've actually been in this long enough to see 3 generations of CryptoLocker tools.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them will do multiple directories at once, some of them won't. And
mm-hmm.
until you get the tool and try it, you don't really know.
So the other thing, it sounds like from a budget perspective, sort of hate to say this, but like we should have a budget line that says, getting our files back, and just sort of put away a bit of money for that, as if, not that it is inevitable, but that it's not an unlikely experience in this day and age.
Well, there's also, the insurance industry has come up with some products that they refer to as breach insurance, and I'm not sure what all is covered with their insurance. The main intent of that insurance is if you're a healthcare firm and you're breached and you have to notify 100,000 patients, the breach insurance picks up the cost of the notification.
Got it.
Okay, so it's not necessarily going to provide funding, and that's a function of you having to read those insurance policies. So,
right.
To me, the much more important thing is to make sure that you have good backups and that they're checked, and you make sure that you've got those backups, because the odds of needing them given today's threats is higher than it was a year or 2 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. All right. The other questions I have, we'll talk with you offline. Nothing that really needs to be handled by all of us. So, thank you very much. And do we have access to the slides? I don't know, because I would want to share them with a few of my management people.
I've recorded this, and Courtney will let everybody know when we figure out how to get it up on the internet, because this is the first one we're doing like this. So.
Okay. Oh,
I did
great.
record it so other people can go out and watch it.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you both. All right, take care.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay,
Bye.
thanks.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.